Have you ever wondered if what you know as Christianity is it really what Jesus taught? And if I told you that the faith that moves billions of people around the world may have been rewritten not by divine inspiration, but for political convenience? Who shaped the religion we know today? Was it Christ, or were emperors, bishops, and advice gathered in dark and strategic halls? Imagine for a moment you could go back in time, not until the days of Jesus, but a little later, when his teachings began to spread, but also to be disputed. There were dozens of gospels circulating. Some communities saw Mary Magdalene as a spiritual leader. Others do not create in the literal deity of Christ, and many of them had not even heard of Trinity. Christianity, in its early centuries, was a quilt of mystical flaps, spiritual and deeply diverse. But something happened. Something, or someone, reorganized everything, deleted voices, raised others, and instituted a new pattern of faith. It was not a subtle process. It was a true religious engineering. And that's what this video will treat about. Get ready for a journey that crosses secret documents, imperial councils, and decisions that have forever changed Western spirituality. You will see how a spiritual movement has become a power structure, and why this still influences your life today, even if you have never noticed. Stay to the end, because the answers you are about to listen to, maybe they are more uncomfortable and more liberating than you ever imagined. Before becoming the official religion of an empire, Christianity was a fragmented, decentralized, and highly diverse spiritual movement. In the first 3 centuries after the death of Jesus, there was no church as we know today. There were communities, small groups, often persecuted, gathering in homes, caves, deserts, and each group interpreted the master's teachings in his own way. These early Christians did not have a New Testament. The Gospels we know today, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were just some among dozens of sacred texts in circulation. Gospels of Thomas, Mary, Philip, Judas, each with his own view of who Jesus was, what was his mission, and how the human being should seek the divine. In some, Jesus is described as a master of cosmic wisdom. In others, like the incarnate Logos himself, there are reports in which Mary Magdalene is the closest disciple to Jesus, and others who have a more esoteric view, where the kingdom of God is not a place but a state of conscience. It was a living, constantly expanding faith, more like a search network than an institution, and it was precisely this diversity that deeply bothered the authorities. The more Christianity grew, the more unpredictable it became. For Roman rulers, it was like trying to hold back water, impossible to control something that had no unique form. The persecution of Christians at first was not only for their faith, but for their fragmentation. It was difficult to negotiate or master a movement that did not have a power center. And that's right that the game started to change. Because where there is no structure ... someone will always try to build one. And when this structure is born, it is usually not born of faith, but from the need for control. What was about to happen would transform not only Christianity, but the very course of history. And ironically, it would begin with the interest of a pagan emperor in solving a political crisis. The name that divides waters in the history of Christianity is one: Constantine, Roman emperor, genius strategist, master of political convenience. 312 after Christ. He claims to have had a vision, a cross in heaven, accompanied by the phrase, "With this sign you will win." Shortly thereafter, he would win the decisive battle of the Milvia Bridge and become the Lord of Rome. From there, it would be nothing more, neither for the empire, nor to the Christian faith. Constantine saw in Christianity not only a rising religion, but a powerful tool to unite a ruined empire. And so, with a miracle gesture, or perhaps it was calculation, he decreed the Edict of Milan, ending the persecution of Christians and giving them freedom of worship. It was the end of martyrdom and the beginning of the negotiation. But there was a problem. Christianity, as we have seen, was anything but uniform. There were deep theological disputes. Some said that Christ was incarnate God. Others, who was a being created by God. There were debates about the nature of the Holy Spirit, about the resurrection, about the role of women. And for an empire, a divided faith is a threat. It was necessary to unify and fast. In 325 after Christ, Constantine calls the First Council of Nicaea, not for devotion, but for political necessity. He was not a theologian. It hadn't even been baptized yet, but presided over the council with a firm hand. The goal, to define, once and for all, what was true Christianity. It was there that the Nicene Creed was born, affirming the divinity of Christ and establishing an orthodoxy. Those who disagreed were exiled, labeled heretics. His works were prohibited, your ideas silenced. For the first time, Christianity was no longer only faith, and became an official doctrine, sanctioned by decree. It was at this moment that spirituality began to bend before authority. The voice of the mystics gave way to the voice of the councils. It was no longer about finding God, It was about repeating formulas. And these formulas, defined under pressure, would shape centuries of theology, culture, and identity. The Jesus who walked among the poor and spoke in parables. He was being replaced by an imperial, enthroned, and distant Christ. And yet the change would not stop there, because the institutionalization of faith would require more than creeds. It would require erasing anything that did not fit the new paradigm. To consolidate a unique Christianity, it was necessary more than establishing dogmas. It was necessary to erase the alternatives. And this is where the story gets even more disturbing contours, because what was silenced, perhaps it would say more about the original Christ than what was left. Many of the so-called apocryphal Gospels, sacred texts respected by various early Christian communities, were deliberately excluded. The Gospel of Thomas, for example, does not describe miracles or crucifixion. He presents Jesus as a master of conscience, whose central message was self-knowledge. The kingdom is within you and around you. The Gospel of Mary, yes, Mary Magdalene, shows an educated and valued disciple, capable of understanding spiritual revelations that the apostles themselves could not assimilate. But these texts were considered dangerous, not for contradicting Jesus, but for threatening the new religious hierarchy that was formed. A Christ who invites introspection, who values the feminine, who says that God is inside, is incompatible with a faith that requires intermediaries, external rules, and submission to an institution. In addition to the texts, symbols were reformulated. The fish, one of the first secret signs among Christians, gave way to the cross, symbol of the empire and public execution. The suffering Christ, hanging in the tree, became the center of iconography, replacing the image of the enlightened master, until the date of the birth of Jesus was reorganized to coincide with pagan festivities, such as the Invictus Sol, favoring the cultural transition of a Roman Empire still immersed in solar religiosity. Practices have changed too. Silent meditation, common in the early Gnostic Christians, was replaced by formal rituals. The inner search gave way to external obedience. Baptism of mind gave way to institutionalized baptism, with date, place, and clerical control. What was once experienced ... became a norm. And the most disturbing, all this was done in the name of faith. But what faith? The one that is born of freedom to seek the truth in God, or the one who depends on that you accept? Without question, what was decided by men with power? The official narrative was written to ink, but the fragments of the true story survive between the lines. In desert rescued manuscripts and rediscovered gospels in Nag Hammadi, in persecuted communities that have kept memories hidden for generations, they still whisper for those who have ears to hear. And these whispers echo an uncomfortable truth. Christianity has changed, and not always by divine inspiration, but the most amazing ... It's yet to come. Faith, to be pure, should be transmitted with integrity. But what to do when those who control this transmission also control what should or should not be remembered? For centuries, a meticulous and silent selection of documents, ideas, and interpretations shaped what we today call Christian doctrine. And much of that ... it was built through denial. After the Council of Nicaea, other councils came, such as Constantinople, Ephesus, and Chalcedon, each reaffirming and adjusting doctrines according to theological but also political interests. The Trinity, the original sin, the infallibility of the Scriptures, all these elements, which today seem unchanging, were established from intense disputes, with many vows overcome. When a chain won, it was not just respected ... the others were silenced. Gnostics, for example, were labeled as heretics, not for lack of spirituality, but for excess depth. They taught that God's direct knowledge was accessible to all, and that the true Christ was a liberator of conscience, not a redeemer for suffering. For the system that was formed, this was unacceptable. After all, if you can find God within you, why would you need a church to be saved? And so, his works were destroyed, their names forgotten, their schools dismantled. The surviving manuscripts, such as those of Nag Hammadi, discovered only in 1945, were hidden in clay jars, buried as if they were dangerous relics. And in fact, they were ... dangerous to the constituted power. Another example is the figure of Mary Magdalene. In apocryphal texts, it is portrayed as the disciple that understood the words of Jesus more deeply. But in the 6th century, Pope Gregory first sealed his destiny by declaring it, without textual basis, as a sorry prostitute. A subtle and symbolic maneuver that relegated the feminine in Christian spirituality for centuries. The impact of this echoes to this day. And what about the Bible itself? During the Middle Ages, the ordinary people were forbidden to have access to the Scriptures. The reading was exclusive to the clergy, in Latin, inaccessible to the people. Translators like William Tyndale were persecuted, condemned, and killed for daring to make the word understandable to people. Faith was transformed into a secret code, accessible only to those who controlled the keys. These distortions were not just doctrinal. They were cultural, social, spiritual, and over time, they left deep marks. So deep that many do not even know that there was a story before the official history. But now ... you know, and maybe start to see the world with other eyes. In the face of all this, a question imposes with strength. What did all this have done with our spirituality? When faith becomes structure, when the sacred is shaped by historical conveniences, what is left of essence? Christianity that has come to us is beautiful, yes, but it is also a collective work of men, emperors, councils, and interests. The Christ of the Gospels, the one who walked barefoot, who sat with sinners, who spoke of the kingdom as something within the human being, often gave way to the institutional Christ, transformed into dogma, trapped in rituals, distant and hierarchical. Spiritual experience has given way to theological submission. The questioning, something Jesus himself encouraged the disciples, came to be seen as a threat. And so, for centuries, millions of souls sought the divine not in silence, but in fear. Fear of hell, fear of doubt, fear of thinking differently. This has generated not only an inner removal, but a kind of emptiness that is perpetuated to this day. Many follow rites ... but they don't feel. Read the Scriptures, but they do not understand. They speak in the name of God, but act in the name of tradition. And they do not realize that tradition was, in many cases, built to serve the interests of the faith. But there is something that resists, an invisible wire and spark that doesn't go out. She lives in the silent curiosity of those who ask, in the intuition of those who realize that there is something beyond what was taught, in search of those who feel that true spirituality is intimate, alive, and personal. Today, with access to old documents, archaeological discoveries, and a new headquarters for authenticity, many people are awakening, not against Christianity, but but in search of what was lost from him. They are rediscovering the value of meditation, gnosis, direct connection with God, without intermediaries. They are seeing that faith and freedom can and should walk together. And the most curious thing is that perhaps this return movement is not heresy ... but a continuation of what Jesus began. For he himself said, "Truth shall set you free." And for that to happen, it must first have the courage to look at everything they tried to hide. Maybe, after all this, you are wondering, what now? What do I do with this information? Should I abandon everything I learned? Should I suspect my faith, the Bible, the church? The answer, perhaps, is not in denial, but in reintegration, because spirituality is not a ready building. It is a way, and this path is made of conscious steps, sincere questions, and discoveries that sometimes challenge everything they have taught us. This is not a threat to faith. This is what strengthens it. What we have seen today is just the surface of something much greater. The story of how a message of love, simplicity, and inner awakening has been gradually shaped by human hands. Hands that sought stability, control, order. Hands that, at times, wanted to protect ... but also to shut up. But the sacred is stubborn. It survives between the lines. In the forgotten Gospels, in hidden traditions, in the symbols buried by time, and, above all, in the heart of those who dare to ask. Because there is a kind of faith that does not need to be imposed. It is born when silence is no longer absence, and it is listening. You do not need to reject Christianity, but it can, yes, find it again. Not in conventions, but in essence. Not in the walls of institutions, but in the depth of the spirit. The true Christ does not fear the questions. It is the very response in the form of presence. In the next few episodes, we will continue to exploit these hidden roots, these silenced texts, these forgotten figures. Let's hear the whispers that echo from the caves, the scrolls, the souls they have never stopped searching. Because sometimes, what has been forgotten for centuries is exactly what can free us today. Already subscribe to the channel so as not to lose even an episode, even more.